السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا بكم. عاملين إيه يا رب؟ دايما تكونوا بخير وبصحة وبسلام. شفنا قبل كده محطات كتير بتتكلم عن الجزائر، منها الروسية، طبعا عملتها قبل كده على القناة، محطة روسية بتتكلم عن الجزائر، وكان الإعلام الروسي، وكانت ساعتها مذيعة روسية. أو الإعلام الروسي كان إيه رأيه لما نزل الجزائر، وكان إيه رأيه في الشعب الجزائري. وشفنا برضو قبل كده محطات كتير جدا. في فيديو النهاردة بقى هنشوف محطة أمريكية بتتكلم عن الجزائر. تعالوا بينا نشاهد الفيديو مع بعض وهرجع لكم تاني.
It has been thrilling to watch disciplined, peaceful protesters in Algeria kick out their 20-year president. But as with many of these Arab Spring-type protests, things are now getting more complicated. The protesters want more change. The regime obviously wants less. And many outsiders are now confidently predicting disaster. Disaster is certainly a possibility, but I have higher hopes. Because Algeria is a much stronger country than most people realize. Over the past month, I have covered the disaster in Libya and the extraordinary accomplishments of Tunisia. It's tempting to claim that Algeria could follow in the footsteps of either of these two neighbors, but that undersells both the potential and the risk here. Algeria is a different class of country from either Libya or Tunisia. On the most obvious level, there are 40 million Algerians, not 6 or 12 million. Algeria is a serious regional power, and a successful transition to representative democracy there could change the entire Arab world. I am more optimistic about Algeria than most because its strength and independence makes it almost unique among Arab countries. If I were making this video back before the 2014 oil price crash, I'd probably start a conversation about Algerian power by talking about its massive oil and gas industry. That industry is now more of a liability than a strength. The price crash is one of the main reasons these protests are happening. But Algerian strength is not just about petroleum. It's about history. Algeria's neighbors had a fairly easy transition to independence. Libya's colonial oppressor, Italy, went and lost World War II, making independence in 1951 fairly straightforward. Tunisia had to struggle a bit longer, but the French let them go in 1956 to focus on other priorities. France's main priority at that time was Algeria. Most direct European control in the Middle East and North Africa was brutal, but haphazard and largely pointless. Algeria was different. For starters, its period of oppression was a half-century longer than the rest of the regions. From the 1830s, the country had been a French national project, meant to compete with the British Empire's much more impressive feats of colonization and exploitation. Administratively, Algeria was treated as just another part of France, and by the 1950s, over 1 million Europeans had settled in Algeria. Some of them had been there for generations. The French were never going to let Algeria go easily. Between 1954 and 1962, the Algerians fought the French in one of the most brutal wars of independence the world has ever seen, killing an estimated 300,000 people. Back in 2013, I visited Algeria and I was very impressed. It's like a memory of a vanished world. All the streets are named after mid-20th century revolutionary heroes. It's a place that shouts defiance of the imperial oppressor. You know, people like me. Algeria traditionally doesn't like the United States much. Officially they were
يعني هو بيتكلم يا جماعة، شوفوا هم، يعني هو بيقول ايه؟ بيقول الجزائر يعني أقوى مما يتوقع الكثيرون أو مما يظن الكثيرون. وهو دارس تاريخ الجزائر كويس على فكرة. هم بيحبوا دايما الأجانب، يعني ايه، بيحبوا يدرسوا جدا المشروع الأبطال، مشروع النضال، ان البلد دي مثلا حربت وأبطال من صغير لكبير يعني. فهم عارفين تاريخ الجزائر، عارفين ايه اللي حصل. يعني هو جايب تاريخ الجزائر من أول خالص لحد يعني تاريخ الكبير بتاع الجزائر. فهو بيشرحه للناس، فدي حاجة كويسة جدا. يعني دي حاجة شهادة احنا نتشرف بيها ان محطة أمريكية او يعني حد أجنبي بيتكلم عن الجزائر، حد غريب مش عربي، يعني بيتكلم بيقول رأيه عن دولة عربية.
aligned, but in their rhetoric and reputation, they were very much on the other side of the Cold War. That may have bugged me 32 years ago, but now Algeria's fierce independence is something that I think the Arab world can use. Every other country in the region is heavily reliant on the United States or its Gulf state colonies. After 9/11, the Algerian regime did start working with the United States in limited counter-terror capacities, but they have always kept the world hegemon at arm's length. Algerians remember their fierce battle for independence. You may be getting the sense that I find the Algerian regime weirdly impressive. I hate to admit it, but I think you may be right. They're the last representatives of the old Arab nationalist dream that held so much promise over a half-century ago. Both Egypt and Syria still play lip service to those ideas, but those countries are obviously the playthings of outside powers. Algeria really still is independent. Unfortunately, it took a high degree of brutality both to get them there and keep them there. This brutality is a product of the independence struggle itself. If you haven't seen the Battle of Algiers, you are really missing out. The thinly fictionalized film was made with the participation of some of the fighters just a few years after victory. It doesn't skimp on the evils committed by the French or by the Algerians. It's one of the best films of the 20th century. The French were kicked out by necessarily brutal men and women. After independence, unfortunately, that brutality was sometimes turned against the Algerian people. In 1988, in part as a result of the last oil price crash, the Algerian people had had enough. They demanded a say in their own government, and the regime at the time decided to give it to them, setting up multi-party elections. Nobody else in the region was trying something like that back then. Algeria was far ahead of its time. Too far.
زي ما شفنا الفيديو مع بعض، الفيديو على فكرة جميل جدا، قد ايه هم مهتمين بالحاجات اللي هي يعني بيدرسوا الحاجات اللي هي بتبقى فيها قصص تاريخ. حتى هو بيقول أنا زرت الجزائر في يعني عام 2013. هم من النوع اللي هو بيحبوا يشوفوا يدرسوا، رغم ان بلدهم يعني امريكا طبعا متقدمه من الدول المتقدمه، لكن هم بيعجبوا جدا بالدول اللي بيبقى ليها تاريخ نضال، تاريخ حافل، تاريخ كبير، تاريخ اثري. يعني هم حتى هو قال معلومات قيمه جدا، معلومات دارسها، هو درس المعلومات دي وملم جدا بالجزائر ومعجب جدا بالشعب الجزائري وبدولة الجزائر. فيا رب احفظ أهل الجزائر، يا رب دولة الجزائر وشعبها يا رب. أشوفكم إن شاء الله خير. طبعا مستنية آرائكم في التعليقات. أشوفكم إن شاء الله على خير في الفيديو الجاي. دمتم في رعاية الله وحفظه، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. مع ألف سلامة.